Okay, so the last talking points that we have in this chapter, and also by extension in this unit, we're going to talk about shareholders, their rights and obligations, powers. All right. Um, as a shareholder, all right, um, shareholders do have the right to approving certain fundamental changes to the corporation. You may ask, what changes? Well, it really depends on the corporate bylaws. Now, with most mega corporations, um, it's relatively limited, right? But it depends on what the bylaws say shareholders have the right to approve. All right. Um, Shareholders get to vote when the bylaws are to be amended. All right. And that does require a shareholder vote. In many cases, also mergers or acquisitions. And again, this can be removed or modified in the bylaws, but generally, at common law at least, shareholders must vote to merge with another company or acquire another company. All right. Um, when the corporations dissolve, and that process looks a lot like the dissolval or dissolution of a partnership. Um, they have the right to force a sale of corporate assets, and then of course distribution of what we'll refer to as a liquidating dividend, which would be the last act of a corporation before they go out of business. All right. And of course, we're aware the election of directors. Shareholders can also remove members of the board of directors. All right. Stock certificates. Generally, this is waived under modern transactions. And you have e-certificates, which are electronic. But let's talk a bit about preemptive right. All right. Um, so a preemptive right. Let's say I own 20% of the outstanding stock of a company, and that company decides to sell more stock. Well, if they sell more stock and I don't get any of it, I am going to own less than 20%. Well, what a preemptive right allows me to do is when a company brings new stock to market, I have a preemptive right to buy 20% of that new stock, which means after the new stock is issued, I still will control 20% of the stock and 20% of the voting rights. All right. We'll skip over warrants. I don't test that. Dividends, distributions of earnings. Well, shareholders have a right to dividends when the company pays them. They don't have a right to force the company to pay a dividend. In fact, that's why we have the big three as it relates to automotive in the United States. Right, the big three are, of course, General Motors, Ford, and currently it's Fiat Chrysler, but it used to be Dodge Motor Company. So the story goes, the two biggest investors in Ford when it went public were the Dodge brothers. All right, and Henry Ford elected not to pay a dividend, and Henry Ford believed that the money that they would pay dividends was better spent expanding the company so they could make more cars and by extension sell more cars. All right. The Dodge brothers didn't like that because if they don't get dividends, they don't make money, right? Or at least they can make money through stock appreciation, but they wanted a dividend. So they sued to compel Ford Motor Company to pay dividend, and they lost. All right. So stockholders have a right to participate in dividends when paid, but they cannot force a company to pay a dividend, right? And of course, the postscript to the story that I was telling was the Dodge brothers sold all of their Ford stock at a substantial profit, of course, and took that money and formed Dodge Motor Company, all right? Which competed with Ford for a very, very long time recently, and now it's owned by Fiat, which is technically not American anymore, but you know, they competed with Ford for a very, very long time, and in fact was successful in taking market share away from Ford. Okay. Transfer. You can sell your shares when you get ready to. That's one of the benefits of ownership. Okay. Rights on dissolution. I previously alluded to that. When the company goes bankrupt, shareholders have a right to a pro rata share of corporate assets. And what that looks like is the corporation is going to sell everything they own, convert it to cash, and then pay to shareholders in proportion to their ownership. In other words, if I own 10% of the shares in a corporation that's gone bankrupt, and if there are $1 million in liquidated assets, my distribution, my dividend, my liquidating dividend would be $100,000 or 10% of that. All right. Shareholder derivative suit. All right. And technically, this is when these shareholders sue their own company. Usually it's not for money. Usually it's to compel the company to do something, to force a company to do something. So I just described one shareholder derivative suit. Dodge Brothers versus Ford Motor Company, right? That's an example of a shareholder derivative suit. All right. Last point. We've already made this one, but I will reiterate it because it's a very important point. Shareholders are not personally liable for debts of the corporations, right? In 99.9% of all cases, that's true, unless the corporate veil is pierced, right? We talked about the circumstances when that can happen. Okay, till next time.